I was sitting in the semi-darkness, the only illumination coming from a soft yellow lamp, when the doorbell shattered the quiet. It wasn't a polite chime. It was 3 hard, rapid presses. I glanced at my tactical watch. 9:47 p.m. A cold March drizzle was beating against the window panes. I was sitting in Margaret's old recliner, the faded blue one, with the worn fabric where her hand used to rest. She had been gone for almost 4 years, but on nights like this, sitting there grounded me. The bell assaulted my ears again, followed by a sharp rap of knuckles against the glass. "Stand down, I'm moving," I muttered, pushing myself up. My knees popped in protest, a parting gift from my time in the service, followed by 30 years hauling gear as a structural engineer. I moved down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. When I unbolted the door, the frigid air washed over me. Standing under the porch light was my son. Daniel, at his feet sat 2 massive suitcases. Standing slightly ahead of him was his fiancée, Kelly. She wore a pristine cream-colored trench coat, clutching a designer tote bag like a shield. Her expression was the cool, calculated look of a bank manager evaluating an asset. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice tight, "we're moving in." I didn't react immediately. Behind them, their silver SUV was parked aggressively in my driveway, its hatch open, stuffed with designer luggage. "For how long?" I asked. Keeping my tone flat, Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "Just for a little while. The lease situation got messy. We need a bridge." Before he could elaborate, Kelly stepped forward. "It will be significantly easier if we just get settled tonight, Dennis," she said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. "We are utterly exhausted." She didn't say Mr. Bennett. She called me Dennis, with the exact intonation a corporate manager uses when addressing the janitorial staff. And she said it as though I had invited them. I shifted my gaze to my son. I waited for him to apologize for the intrusion, to show some semblance of respect. Instead, he simply looked down and grabbed the heaviest suitcase. He was 35 years old, but in that fleeting second, he looked completely subjugated by the woman's standing next to him. I took a half step back. "Come on in," I said. Kelly's lips curled into a tight, victorious smirk. She marched past me, the wheels of her luggage tracking dirty water straight onto the vintage Persian rug Margaret had haggled for in Noblesville. Before the deadbolt even clicked into place, Kelly reached into her designer tote. She pulled out a sheet of heavy cardstock, laminated. She turned on her heel and handed it to me. "I drafted a basic house schedule," she announced, "just so everyone is crystal clear on the expectations." At the top, printed in bold font, were the words, "House rules and daily patrols." I scanned the first few bullet points, my mind automatically shifting into analytical processing. Breakfast prepared and plated by 6 a.m. sharp. Guest bathroom sanitized nightly before 10 p.m. Laundry separated. Dress shirts pressed, not steamed. Common areas cleared of personal clutter, magazines, old tools. I genuinely thought it was some kind of bizarre joke. I looked at Daniel. He was desperately pretending to examine his suitcase handle. Kelly tapped the laminated sheet with one perfectly manicured acrylic fingernail. Tap, tap. "There is nothing unreasonable there, Dennis. Structure helps everyone function at peak efficiency." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. It was the icy, calculated calm that used to wash over me right before I had to disarm a volatile explosive device. "This list," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "This is for my house?" She offered a razor-thin smile. "This is for all of us, to maintain order." I looked past her into the kitchen. I saw the little wooden recipe box by the stove, holding Margaret's cards. I looked at the refrigerator, a mosaic of our family's history. Then I looked back at the laminated sheet of demands held by a woman who hadn't been in my house for more than 90 seconds. She was a manipulator, a textbook gaslighter, testing the perimeter to see how much ground she could take. She wanted me to blow up so she could play the victim. So I retreated, strategically. I folded the paper carefully and offered her a mild, vacant smile. "Well," I said, sounding exactly like a tired old man. "That's certainly organized." Daniel let out a massive, shaky breath. He thought the crisis was averted. That first night, I carried their bags down the hall, letting my right hip drag just a little to sell the act. "Thanks, Dad," Daniel whispered when Kelly vanished into the bathroom. He looked gutted. "Get some sleep, son," I replied quietly. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar footsteps echoing through my hallways. The enemy was inside the wire. Kelly had just made a fatal mistake. She had assumed I was a soft target. She was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. By the time the sun bled through the gray clouds, the next morning, the hostile takeover had officially commenced. Losing control of your home doesn't happen in one massive event. It happens in increments, a slow erosion of your territory. I walked into my kitchen at 5:45 a.m. to find my vintage ceramic coffee mugs had been relocated to the highest, most inaccessible cabinet. In their place were identical, sterile white cups. By noon, the thermostat was cranked up to a sweltering 74. By dinner time, my Wi-Fi password had been changed. The psychological warfare peaked on their second day. I had just returned from Kroger. I carried the paper grocery bag through the front door, shaking the rain off my Carhartt jacket, and froze. Margaret's blue recliner was gone from the corner by the window. I found Daniel halfway across the living room, sweating as he dragged the heavy chair toward the garage door. Kelly stood nearby, arms crossed, directing him. "What's going on?" I asked. Kelly spun around, flashing a fake smile. "Oh, Dennis! We're just opening up the space. That chair is incredibly dated, and it was destroying the feng shui of the room." I locked eyes with my son. "That was your mother's chair," I said. The baritone rumble made Daniel flinch. Before he could process the guilt, Kelly swooped in. "We aren't throwing it away, Dennis. We're simply storing it. It's an eyesore." Daniel swallowed hard and resumed dragging it to the garage. They pushed it into the darkest corner, near my old workbench. Kelly immediately threw a plastic tarp over it and stacked 3 large plastic storage bins in front of it, burying it. That evening, I found the laminated house rules document plastered to the center of the refrigerator door, slapped directly over a photograph of Margaret holding a newborn Daniel. I didn't rip it down. I carefully moved Margaret's picture a few inches to the right, ensuring her face was visible. The next morning, I decided it was time to conduct a stress test on the enemy's perimeter. At precisely 6:00 a.m., I walked to the hall closet and hauled out the heavy industrial-grade Hoover vacuum cleaner Margaret had purchased in 1988. It sounded like a lawnmower grinding up loose gravel. I plugged it in directly outside the guest bedroom door, flicked on my battery-powered radio, cranking classic Willie Nelson, and hit the vacuum's power switch. The machine roared to life. 30 seconds later, the guest room door violently swung open. Kelly stood in the doorframe, her hair disheveled, eyes wide with fury. "What on earth are you doing?" she shrieked. I calmly clicked off the vacuum. "Morning," I said cheerfully. "It's 6 a.m. sharp. I know what time it is." Daniel appeared behind her. "Dad, come on, what's the deal?" I looked directly at Kelly. The laminated schedule, rule number 2, common areas and high-traffic zones cleaned and prepped early. Just doing my part. For the first time since she had breached my door, Kelly was speechless. She couldn't argue without dismantling her own rules. I gave them both a crisp nod, turned the vacuum back on, and continued. By the end of the first week, she shifted tactics, treating me not as an elder, but as live-in hired help. She began leaving passive-aggressive post-it notes. "Dennis, please pick up the dry cleaning." "Dennis, the gutters look clogged." I played along perfectly. I became the most agreeable handyman in Hamilton County. "Sure thing, Kelly." Every time I complied, her arrogance swelled. She stopped lowering her voice when taking phone calls. One evening, I was in the garage, applying grease to the hinges of the door that led into the kitchen. I heard her voice floating down the hallway. "I am telling you, we can't keep pretending this is temporary," Kelly said. I paused, tuning my hearing. Daniel muttered something indistinct. "No, I'm serious," Kelly snapped back. "This place needs to stop feeling like your dad's house. If we're going to stay here permanently, things have to change. We need him to sign the paperwork before he changes his mind. He's a total pushover. Just get it done. Permanently, sign the paperwork." A few days later, a Wayfair delivery truck backed into my driveway. 2 men unloaded an enormous white sectional sofa, dumping it exactly where Margaret's recliner used to be. Kelly was taking pictures of it. "Doesn't this open up the space, Dennis?" she asked. Daniel pretended to read the delivery manifest. You two are buying heavy furniture for a place you're only staying in for a little while? I asked, dangerously soft. Kelly let out a condescending laugh. Oh, it's an investment piece. Dennis, we can take it with us later. Lies. The disrespect hit critical mass the following Saturday. Kelly had hosted a casual dinner for colleagues from her corporate firm. I had spent the afternoon pulling weeds, wearing my grimy Carhartt jacket. Around 8 o'clock, I walked through the back door. The kitchen was full of strangers. A man in a tailored suit took one look at my dirt-stained clothes and pointed at me with his wine glass. Oh hey, he said to Kelly, is this the handyman? I need someone to look at my deck. The kitchen went dead silent. I looked at Daniel. It would have taken him 2 seconds to correct the man. No, that's my father. This is his house. I stared right into his soul, waiting for him to defend his blood. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes. He said absolutely nothing. Kelly swooped in. Oh, God, no, Mark. That's just Dennis. He helps out around here. Just Dennis. My apologies, Dennis. The man chuckled. No harm done, I replied smoothly. But internally, the safety was off. I walked out the back door toward the property line, where my neighbor, Harold Wills, was leaning against the fence. Harold was a retired Hamilton County Sheriff's deputy. He handed me a root beer. You hiding from the yuppie invasion, or hiding evidence? Both, maybe. Harold watched Kelly hold court in my kitchen. People don't steal a house all at once. Dennis, he said quietly. They make you feel like a guest first. They break your perimeter, then take your authority. I know, I said, my voice hardening, but they made one fatal miscalculation. They think I'm unarmed. The following morning, I shifted my operations from passive observation to active intelligence gathering. I had spent 25 years as a combat engineer before I retired, and if there was one thing I knew how to do, it was how to assess a foundation for hidden cracks. While Kelly and Daniel were at their respective corporate offices, I sat at my kitchen table and began compiling the evidence. I wasn't just scribbling complaints. I was building a dossier. Every text message Kelly had sent, every passive-aggressive post-it note, the laminated list of house rules, the receipts for the Wayfair furniture. Then, I brought in external resources. I met Harold under the pretense of borrowing a power washer. I handed him a slip of paper with Kelly's full maiden name and her current employer. I need a background sweep, Harold, I said quietly. Nothing illegal, just public records, financial filings, whatever you can pull without waving a red flag. Harold took the paper and gave me a grim nod. Give me 48 hours. He only needed 24. The next evening, while Kelly and Daniel were out, Harold slipped through my back door and dropped a manila folder onto the kitchen island. It's worse than you thought, Dennis, Harold said, taking off his baseball cap. She's drowning. I opened the folder. The numbers were staggering. Over the last 18 months, Kelly had lost her 2 biggest clients. She had maxed out 4 separate credit cards to maintain the illusion of a luxury lifestyle. Daniel's salary was barely covering the minimum payments. They hadn't come to my house because their lease got messy. They had been practically evicted. She's backed into a corner, Harold said, tapping a credit card statement. She's looking at your house, not as a place to stay, but as an ATM. If she can get you to sign the deed over, she can leverage the equity, take out a massive loan, and bury her debt. You're her exit strategy. I closed the folder, an icy calm spreading through my veins. Thank you, Harold. Now I know the target's motivation. The next morning, I sat at the table drinking my coffee and staring at that laminated list of rules on the refrigerator. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called since Margaret passed. Bennett and Lowe Estate Planning, the receptionist answered. This is Dennis Bennett, I said, my voice rock solid. I need an emergency meeting with Elaine Porter. Today, by 1 o'clock, I was sitting in a mahogany-paneled office in Carmel, Indiana. Elaine Porter was a razor-sharp attorney who had handled my affairs for over a decade. She reviewed the contents of the grocery bag I had brought, the photos of Margaret's displaced chair, the Wayfair receipts, the house rules, and Harold's printouts. I don't want revenge, Elaine, I told her, but I refuse to become a casualty in my own home. Elaine folded her hands over the documents, her expression unreadable. You are in a uniquely powerful position, Dennis. 4 years ago, when Margaret passed, You agreed to create an irrevocable trust to protect Daniel from probate issues. You remember that? I do. That means the trust owns the house, not you, Elaine explained. You retain a lifetime occupancy right. You cannot be forced to leave. You cannot be coerced into a sale. Kelly can push Daniel all she wants, but legally, they are standing on solid rock, trying to dig a hole with a plastic spoon. I want to reinforce the perimeter, I said. I want to add specific language regarding elder coercion, unauthorized occupancy, and attempts to manipulate estate decisions. I want to build a legal minefield. Elaine offered a slow, predatory smile. Consider it done. We can serve them an eviction notice tomorrow. No, I replied instantly. If I just kick them out, Daniel will always view Kelly as the victim. I need to expose her. I need him to see exactly who he's marrying. Over the next 2 weeks, Kelly grew bolder, completely unaware she was walking into a trap. The more agreeable I acted, the more she revealed her true colors. One evening, I found her leaning over the kitchen island, studying a massive sheet of architectural blueprints. What's this? I asked, setting my toolbox on the floor. Oh, don't worry about it, Dennis, she dismissed. Just brainstorming some layout changes. The flow in this house is incredibly outdated. I stepped closer. As a former structural engineer, reading floor plans was second nature. She had drawn a massive red X straight through the load-bearing wall that separated the living room from what used to be Margaret's sewing room. You're planning to knock down that wall? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. If we stay long-term, she said smoothly before catching herself. She forced a bright smile. I mean, if we ever decided to invest in the property. It opens up the floor plan. Behind that specific wall ran the primary HVAC ductwork, the central plumbing stack, and the main electrical feed. Taking a sledgehammer to it would cause catastrophic damage. I wouldn't touch that wall, I said coldly. Kelly rolled her eyes. Oh, Dennis, please. It's just drywall. I watched tutorials on HGTV. We can hand it and argue. Let her plan her demolition. The higher she climbed, the harder the fall was going to be. The climax of her arrogance arrived the following Saturday. Kelly marched into the kitchen, clutching her clipboard. Good news, everybody, she announced with manufactured enthusiasm. What happened? Daniel asked nervously. I just booked the 4th of July barbecue. Kelly beamed. My family, your family, the neighbors, everybody. It's going to be a massive housewarming. I folded my newspaper. A housewarming. For a temporary stay? Kelly waved her hand. Oh, stop it, Dennis. It's going to be perfect. She flipped her clipboard. Oh, and I told everyone that the estate lawyer might stop by. The kitchen temperature plummeted. Daniel froze completely. Kelly? What are you talking about? She ignored him, looking directly at me with a triumphant, predatory gleam. It just makes sense, Dennis. We'll finally get the paperwork handled while everyone is together. Once the house is officially transferred into our names, we can really start the renovations. She had planned an ambush. She intended to use the public pressure of a massive family gathering to guilt me into signing over the deed. So, she chirped, I'll tell everyone to expect some fantastic news. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I think, I said smoothly, that is an absolutely excellent idea. Kelly beamed, utterly victorious, but as I picked up my coffee mug, my eyes met Daniel's. For the first time in weeks, my son looked genuinely terrified. He saw the coldness in my expression. He finally realized his wife hadn't just cornered an old man. She had cornered a veteran, and the ambush was set. The 4th of July arrived with a blistering heat. By 9 o'clock, Kelly had completely seized operational command. She darted around the backyard like a general, a clipboard in hand. Hot dogs on the left side of the grill. She barked at Daniel, who was already sweating. Burgers on the right! I walked out carrying a heavy folding table. Oh, Dennis, Kelly called out cheerfully. Could you wipe these down before everyone gets here? I want everything absolutely pristine for the announcement. She treated me exactly like hired help. Sure thing, Kelly, I replied mildly. You holding the line? Dennis? Harold asked quietly. I'm holding it. Harold nodded. Good, the cavalry is on standby. Around noon, the invasion force arrived. My sister Nancy brought potato salad. My cousin Rick hauled coolers. For a moment, it almost felt like the legendary summer gatherings Margaret used to host. But then the tours began. Kelly led groups of relatives through the house. Our kitchen gets amazing morning light. She boasted. She pointed toward the den. We're thinking of tearing this wall down to create a cohesive, open concept flow, just as soon as the paperwork is officially finalized. Our kitchen, the paperwork. None of my relatives understood what was happening. They assumed I was generously handing the property over. I watched Daniel flipping burgers with robotic precision. He kept throwing nervous glances in my direction. Every time our eyes met, he flinched and looked down. His conscience was eating him alive. Harold wandered over with a paper plate. You nervous? Dennis? A little, I admitted. Good. Adrenaline keeps you sharp. You're executing the right maneuver. At exactly 1:30 p.m., synchronized with the secret distress code I had texted her, a sleek black sedan pulled smoothly into my driveway. Elaine Porter stepped out, dressed in a sharp gray suit, carrying a black leather portfolio. She moved with the unshakable confidence of a woman who destroyed arrogant people for a living. Kelly spotted her immediately. Her eyes lit up. Oh, perfect. Kelly clapped her hands together, hurrying across the grass. Elaine, we are so thrilled you could make it. Elaine offered a polite smile. Good afternoon, Kelly. Kelly immediately raised her voice to command the attention of the 50-plus people scattered across the patio. Everyone. Can I have everyone's attention? The chatter died down. Kelly beamed. Since we have both families gathered here to celebrate our new home, we thought this would be the perfect moment to get the official transfer paperwork signed before dessert. My sister Nancy frowned. Paperwork? What transfer? Kelly laughed dismissively. Oh, Dennis has finally decided it's time to transfer the deed of the house over to Daniel and me. It saves everyone a legal headache later on. Daniel's shoulders locked up. Kelly, he whispered. But Kelly reached into a drawer and pulled out a brand new box of expensive fountain pens. I even bought these specifically for the occasion. Elaine looked at me. I gave her one slow, deliberate nod. Execute. Kelly pulled a pen and held it out toward me. Whenever you're ready, Dennis. I didn't move. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds. Then I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of an apex predator. We won't be needing your pen. Kelly, I said. My voice carried devastating weight. Kelly blinked. What? I said, I repeated with lethal clarity. We will not be needing your pen. The backyard fell dead silent. Elaine unzipped her portfolio. Since there appears to have been a catastrophic misunderstanding, Elaine said, projecting her voice, Mr. Bennett has asked me to officially clarify the ownership status of this property for the record. Kelly's smile disintegrated. This home was legally transferred into an irrevocable trust shortly after Mrs. Margaret Bennett passed away 4 years ago, Elaine stated. Kelly frowned in confusion. What does that have to do with today? He's signing it over. It means, Elaine replied evenly, that Mr. Dennis Bennett no longer personally owns this house. Therefore, he cannot sign it over to you. The trust owns the property entirely. Mr. Bennett retains an absolute lifetime occupancy right. He cannot be forced to leave. He cannot be manipulated into a sale, and the property cannot be legally transferred simply because someone feels entitled to ask for it. Kelly whipped her head around to look at Daniel, seeking backup. Daniel was staring at the charcoal briquettes, completely bloodless. Furthermore, Elaine continued, removing a thick stack of photographs, over the past several weeks, Mr. Bennett has requested that emergency protections be legally added to his estate planning. Protections explicitly designed to combat attempts to pressure, manipulate, or coerce changes to his living situation. Kelly crossed her arms. This is completely ridiculous. This is an ambush. Perhaps, Elaine said smoothly. The evidence will help explain exactly why those drastic protections became necessary. She stepped forward and laid the first photograph face up on the patio table. It was a high-resolution photograph of the darkest corner of my garage. Front and center was Margaret's beloved blue recliner, draped in a dirty plastic tarp, hidden behind stacks of cheap plastic storage bins. Harold took one look at the photograph, grimaced, and quietly turned his head away. My sister Nancy gasped softly. Everyone in my family knew what that chair meant to me. Elaine placed a second photograph directly beside the first. It was my kitchen refrigerator. My family photos had been violently pushed aside. Occupying the center was the laminated sheet of Kelly's house rules. Elaine began reading the bullet points aloud, her voice clinical. Breakfast prepared and plated by 6 a.m. sharp, guest bathrooms to be sanitized nightly before 10 p.m. Laundry separated, dress shirts pressed, not steamed. Nobody laughed. Elaine laid down a third document, a printed transcript of text messages. I have legally obtained records, Elaine stated, including messages mistakenly sent to the family group chat before being deleted. One highlighted sentence reads, "This place needs to stop feeling like your dad's house." Another reads, "We need him to sign the deed before he changes his mind." And finally, "Just put him somewhere smaller." Kelly was the first to attempt a tactical retreat. "This is completely out of context." She sputtered, her pristine composure cracking. Elaine produced another stack of papers. "These are Wayfair furniture invoices, thousands of dollars in unauthorized decor delivered to this address. And here are architectural measurements, notes specifically labeled. Future office, primary bedroom expansion, and open concept living space." My cousin Rick slowly set his drink down. He looked from the blueprints to Kelly. "You already planned the renovations before you even had the deed?" he asked, his voice laced with pure disgust. Kelly opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped. Harold finally broke the tension. "That chair," he said, pointing a calloused finger at the first photograph, "belonged to Margaret." He wasn't talking about furniture. He was talking about respect. Daniel finally lifted his head. The spatula slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the stone pavers. He looked at the photograph of his mother's discarded chair. He looked toward the garage. Then he turned to me, his corporate facade shattered completely. "I knew," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking violently. Nobody moved. "I knew," he repeated, swallowing hard. "I kept telling myself it would never go that far. I kept trying to keep the peace." He looked straight into my eyes. "I was wrong." Kelly spun around and grabbed his arm. "Daniel, what are you doing?" "Stop." He gently pulled his arm away. "No." His voice grew steadier. "Dad deserves to hear this. Everyone deserves to hear this. I should have stopped it. I should have spoken up the very first night when she handed you that list of rules. I should have stopped her when she moved Mom's chair. I should have said something when they stood in your kitchen and thought you were the handyman." His eyes filled with tears, but I didn't. Kelly stared at him in horror. "Are you out of your mind? You're really doing this?" "Yes." Elaine quietly closed her black leather folder. "My legal obligations here are concluded," she said. I took one slow step forward. I swept my gaze across the dozens of relatives standing motionless in my backyard. "I appreciate everyone coming today," I said, my voice resonating. "But I think we all know this barbecue stopped being about hamburgers a long time ago." I turned my full attention to Daniel. "When your mother was dying, she worried about one thing more than anything else," I told him. He lowered his head. "She wasn't worried about this house," I continued. "She wasn't worried about the money. She was worried that you would forget what kind of man she raised." "I'm sorry, Dad," Daniel sobbed. "I know you are." I picked up the laminated house rules sheet. "Do you know what bothered me the most about this piece of paper?" Kelly folded her arms defensively. "It wasn't the demands for breakfast at 6 in the morning," I said, dropping my tone to a lethal whisper. "It wasn't scrubbing the bathrooms. It was the fact that my own son stood there, in silence, while someone handed his father instructions on how to live. Inside the home his mother and I spent 34 years paying for." Daniel covered his face. No, I said firmly. "I don't think you do." I laid the laminated sheet down. "When people ask how families fall apart, they imagine one terrible, explosive day. It almost never happens that way. A foundation doesn't collapse overnight. It falls apart one quiet compromise at a time. It happens with one apology you never demand, one disrespect you never challenge, one silence after another, until the silence becomes the rule." Harold looked down at his boots, nodding. After a long silence, Kelly spoke. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. Her voice was stripped of all its polish. "What?" I asked. "I thought families were supposed to help each other," she said, a flicker of defiance returning. "I thought, if we were going to inherit this house someday, anyway, then making it work for us right now just made logical sense. We were drowning. I nodded slowly. There it is. You weren't waiting for an inheritance. Kelly, I said, my voice echoing like a gavel. You were living inside one. You tried to bury me while I was still breathing. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words died. There was nothing left to defend. Daniel took a step closer to me. I've got $40,000 in credit card debt. He blurted out. He looked around at the stunned family members. I never told you because I was embarrassed. We started borrowing just to survive. We borrowed more to keep up appearances. He looked back at me, defeated. I convinced myself that moving in here would only be a temporary bridge, but every time I should have defended you, I said nothing. I chose the path of least resistance. I failed you, Dad. I took a deep breath. I know life can corner people, Daniel. I've been broke. I've worked double shifts in the freezing rain. I've eaten peanut butter sandwiches for 2 straight weeks. Because your mother and I needed to scrape together the mortgage payment. We did whatever we had to do to survive, I said, my voice hardening. But we never solved our financial problems by stealing someone else's peace. Daniel nodded through his tears. I know. I walked over to the edge of the patio, reaching down to an object I had placed earlier. It was a faded, heavy red metal toolbox. The metal handle was worn smooth. Inside were my original lineman's pliers, wire strippers, and the yellow tape measure Margaret had bought me for our 20th anniversary. I carried the heavy box back to Daniel and held it out. He stared at it. Dad, I can't take this. Take it, I commanded. He accepted the heavy metal box. I don't understand. This toolbox built absolutely everything that mattered in my life. It built my career. It built this house. It built the life your mother and I shared. I locked eyes with him. I am not giving you a house, Daniel. I am giving you a chance. When you figure out how to build something with your own 2 hands again. When you learn how to stand up and protect your own foundation. Come have dinner with me. Daniel broke down completely, sobbing over the metal toolbox. It was the crying of a grown man who had finally stopped pretending. Kelly looked at him, then looked at me, terrified. I don't deserve your kindness, Dennis, she whispered. I looked at her with professional detachment. No, you don't. Another long silence settled over the backyard. The smell of burning hamburgers drifted from the grill. But kindness isn't the same thing as surrender, I continued. Elaine offered a tiny smile. Harold tipped his cap. I looked at Kelly and Daniel. You have 7 days to vacate my property. Daniel nodded immediately. We'll go. Tonight, I will personally write a check to cover the security deposit on a small apartment. I told Kelly. It won't be luxury, but it will be a roof. Kelly looked genuinely shocked. Why would you do that? Because, I replied. I want you to leave. I don't want you to fail. She closed her eyes, tears breaking through her armor. For the first time, she looked genuinely ashamed. Right before they closed the back of the truck, Daniel walked back into the house. He emerged from the garage, struggling under the weight of Margaret's blue recliner. Without saying a word, he hauled it back into the living room. He placed it exactly where it had always been, next to the front bay window where the afternoon sunlight reached it perfectly. He stood there for a long time. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered to the empty room. I know, I said from the doorway. He wiped his eyes and walked out the front door. 3 months passed in quiet peace. The house smelled like my coffee again. The thermostat stayed at 70 one Sunday afternoon. As the autumn leaves began to turn, there was a tentative knock at my front door. Not 3 aggressive pounds, just a quiet, respectful knock. I opened the door to find Daniel. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He held my old red toolbox in his right hand. It had been meticulously cleaned and organized. He smiled nervously. I noticed the porch light was flickering, he said softly. I fixed the wiring. He hesitated. I was wondering if you wanted some company for dinner. I looked at my son for a long, quiet moment. I looked at the calluses starting to form on his hands. Then I stepped aside. I've got enough meatloaf for 2, I said. He laughed softly. Mom would have approved. She probably would have told us both we were being stubborn idiots. We ate dinner at the old oak table. There wasn't much conversation. Some structures just take time to rebuild. They heal quietly. About 6 months later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail from Kelly. There were no excuses inside. There was just a raw, honest apology. She admitted she had confused planning with control, efficiency with disrespect. and asking for help with demanding entitlement. I didn't rush to answer it. Eventually, I wrote back a short, polite note. I accepted her apology, but trust takes significantly longer to build than forgiveness. That fact never changed. Neither did the irrevocable trust protecting my home. The legal documents stayed exactly as Elaine and I had drafted them. The ironclad boundaries remained firmly in place, but eventually so did love. These days, Margaret's blue recliner sits proudly beside the living room window. The family photographs are back on the refrigerator, exactly where they belong. And every now and then, Daniel comes over on a Saturday afternoon with that red toolbox. Sometimes we fix the gutters. Sometimes we just sit on the patio with a cup of black coffee and watch the neighborhood go by in silence. Growing older doesn't mean you have to surrender your voice. It doesn't mean you have to give up your territory or sacrifice your dignity just to keep the peace. Sometimes, the absolute kindest thing you can do for your family is to teach them exactly where the boundary line is drawn, and then have the courage to stand behind it and hold the line. If you've ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping the peace and protecting your own self-respect, just know that you are not alone in the trenches. I'd be honored to hear what you learned from the battle. Thanks for spending your time with me today. Stay sharp and take good care of yourselves.